Sambonani, Molweni, Hoyamora, and Dumalang. Welcome to Cast Chats. My name is Robin Kriegler, and I'm a historian currently based in the frozen Midwestern USA, whose research mainly focuses on humor and satire in Southern Africa. I'm starting Cast Chats as a way to help bring together the two worlds that I work in, stand-up comedy and academia. What is Cast Chats? Cast Chats is a new YouTube and podcast project designed to link comedy artists and practitioners with scholarly conversations about Southern Africa's past and present. Let's face it, universities are not very accessible places unless you happen to be a scholar yourself. And not everyone has easy access to comedy or theater venues either. Cast Chats is intended to form part of an ongoing dialogue where artists and scholars can meet, learn, and connect with each other. On today's episode of Cast Chats, we're talking with the comedian and arts entrepreneur Chantal Harris. Chantal Harris is a mature, menopausal woman with an innate intelligence and zest for life. One of her strongest skills, according to the Gallup Strengths Finder, is that of the connector. Chantal has spent an eternity grappling with her inability to consistently stick with anything, permanent employment included, and it's only recently that things started really making sense. At the pivotal point in her life of 55, with approximately 20 years left to reinvent herself, she decided to opt for a more satisfying and potentially fun career in stand-up comedy. Alongside Nolwazi Nkwandla, she's one of the co-founders of the Friendly City comedy crew in Gqeberha, and her show ADHD, The Bottle and Me is on this March at the Mandela Bay Arts Festival. We talked about Chantal's journey to comedy, her thoughts on arts entrepreneurship, and her love for the history and the art scene of her home city of Nelson Mandela Bay. If you like what you're hearing here at Cast Chats, please remember to like, subscribe, leave a comment, and hit that notification bell so that you're notified the next time we upload a video. We have big plans for this channel, and it really helps us out a lot. Now, on to the show. All right, welcome, Chantal. It's wonderful to get to speak to you this evening. I guess, want to start off by having you introduce yourself in your own words, and we'll take it from there.
Great. Thanks so much, Robin. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm excited to be here.
Mm-hmm.
So I am Chantal Harris. I am from the seaside city of Gqeberha in South Africa. I'm a comedian. I also have a day job. To introduce myself in my own words, I'm a little bit of a hippie. I actually live in a wooden cabin on my parents' property. And I'd love to be totally off-grid. Not there yet. I'm very serious about so many things. But I also like to try and find the humor in things and what's funny about stuff. So
Yeah.
I feel I got like both of those little bits to my personality. I'm a mother of 3 daughters who are, my youngest one's about to turn 21. So I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
It's a big step for me, you know?
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. So I'll just say, I first met you in the context of a conference on humor that was at Nelson Mandela University in Gqeberha, in like 2022. And it was notable because I think we talked about this a little bit before, like there were a bunch of academics at that conference. There were a lot of, people from philosophy and media studies, and I come from a history background. And you and Nolwazi were the 2 comedians basically who were there. And then the fact that this conference was in Gqeberha, not really one of the centers of South African comedy. So I wonder if you could walk us a little bit through your origin story. I mean, obviously a lot happened before today. So how did you find yourself drawn to comedy?
I think there's so many things that have happened in my life that have led to this point, to being where I am. But essentially, why I got into comedy was I'd met Nolwazi. I had seen her open for quite a prominent African comedian. I don't know if you know Sculptor Save Note.
Of course, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, he's world famous now. And she had opened, I was involved at the theatre, the Savoy Theatre, and I'd contacted Skulk. I said, can you please come and do a show here? It was just after COVID. So he came and he was doing shows at our theatre. And I went to watch a couple, and there was this young Black woman on stage being a comedian. And I was like, wow, look at this. And it really was such an inspiration for me to get started in comedy. So I chatted to her a bit, and you know, I didn't know any other comedians really in Port Elizabeth. In actual fact, I didn't even realize there were any comedians in Port Elizabeth. As you say, it doesn't seem to really be the hub of comedy in South Africa, and there doesn't seem to be much going on. So yeah, Nolwazi and I decided to team up, and we started the Friendly City Comedy Crew as a result of that, of those conversations that we had and this friendship that we started there. That wasn't necessarily why I got into comedy, but it definitely was inspiration for me getting into comedy to see this young Black chick telling jokes. And I was like, wow, that's something that I should, wow, she's so brave, so why shouldn't I give it a go? Yeah.
Yeah. Can I ask you a little bit more about like that? Because it's a big step when you see somebody who's like performing and, speaking their truth, being very, very brave, as all comedians have to be. Like, it's one thing to admire and get excited about that person. Then it's another thing to actually want to do the same thing that they're doing. So I don't know
Yeah.
what was happening. What was that thought process like, I guess? Because that is scary, man. That is really freaking scary.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much thinking went into it, Robin. Really, it's the story of my life. That looks so cool. I'm going to give it a try. But there were a couple of things that led up to me actually becoming a comedian. I did one of those values exercises. When you've got like 100 values. It was actually a Brene Brown one, and you sort of, it's a process of elimination, and you end up with two values at the end. And I was so surprised that one of mine was generosity, was the one value, and the other one was humor. And then after seeing Nolwazi on stage and thinking about it, I thought, you know what, let me give it a try. But as I said, I don't think there was a lot of thought that went into it. I certainly had no idea what being a comedian was all about. The repetition, the battling for stage time, the trying to find places to perform, the not getting paid to stand up and perform, that also the not always being that funny. That's a challenge to have to navigate is, how do you get funnier? How do you become funnier? But yeah, it's hard work. There's a lot of rewriting and thinking and rethinking and going over and getting up on stage and trying it differently, getting up on the stage, doing it another way. It's, I'm surprised that I'm still going at it.
Where did you try comedy for the first time?
Well, Nolwazi and I started the Friendly City Comedy Crew, and we started something called The Last Laugh, which essentially was an open mic night. It is an open mic night. We haven't been running it for about 6 months now, but it's an open mic night because I realized, I understood from learning and the little bit of theory that I picked up on being a comedian is that you have to practice. And I didn't know where I was going to practice. So we started The Last Laugh, which is an open mic night. And that's what we were doing that monthly, once a month at Boy Theatre. We'd organize it, we'd get the comedians in. And that's essentially, that was the first time I stepped on stage as a comedian, was as one of the co-founders of The Last Laugh and the Friendly City Comedy Crew.
Goodness, that is commitment. Wow. So
yeah.
that's pretty wild, honestly. I mean, not just sort of like dipping your toe in. I had an experience this past National Arts Festival when I got on stage for the first time, but it was for playthings. It was one spot on an open mic, and I guess you have a background in more like theater stuff and events like that, but to not only perform for the first time, but also have this kind of investment alongside it. And a partnership and stuff like that goes pretty hard, honestly. How long ago was that?
So we started the Friendly City Comedy Crew in, what was last year? 2023. February 2023 was the first time we had an open mic night. And we ran that for 18 months. We
Yeah.
are thinking of doing it, starting it up again, because one of the things, as you said about Gqeberha, is that there are not very many opportunities here for us to perform as comedians. And
Yeah.
unless we're performing as comedians and we're honing our skill, we're honing our craft, we're getting our jokes right, it's going to be very difficult for us to find and get paid gigs. We have managed to find some paid gigs, which is great, but it's difficult if you don't have the practice. So we really, if you go to Cape Town or Johannesburg, you can literally do comedy every single night. If you go to somewhere like New York City, you can do 5 gigs in a night. But yeah, we had once a month.
So walk me through that a little bit. You ran this Friendly City Comedy Crew for 18 months. It's
Mm,
post-pandemic, so it's also like
mm,
lots of different things are, people do not have money. People do not have a lot of you know,
yeah,
um leisure time, honestly, or trying to get people out like butts and seats and stuff can be difficult. What were some of
very.
the biggest lessons, I guess, that you learned in bringing comedy to a place where, I mean, like we've already said, it's not traditionally one of the big strengths of Gqeberha.
I think to get a really good following is critical to build up your audience, your team, the people that support you. There are people that have been to every single one of our shows.
Mm.
That's commitment. It's literally a handful of people, so supportive. But if we have a show, they will buy a ticket, doesn't matter what the ticket price is, and they will come. And it's so fantastic to see that same person in the crowd every time. So the audience to get it, selling the tickets is such a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
No matter what your price, we used to do the last stop was a 40 Rand show.
Mm-hmm.
And we've run other shows that are 100 Rand. We've had visiting comedians 120, 150. So there are a lot of factors that come into play with that. So that's the one big thing is trying to get the audience and build your followers and a supportive group of followers. The other thing is to find the comedians to come and play. Now, when I started, I was like, I don't know any comedians in Port Elizabeth. Let me tell you, when we started The Last Laugh, they came out of the woodwork. There are a lot of comedians doing vernacular comedy. So I've now met a whole lot of Black comedians, excellent Black comedians that have been doing vernacular for many, many years, really quite professional. So that has been so great. My circle of friends in terms of people that are actual comedians has just expanded exponentially. And what also happens is when the national comedians come through and you give them a spot on your stage, obviously you sort of start little sort of relationships with these guys. So the network is great. And I find the comedians generally are always looking for space to play. So they're happy if you're prepared to give them 5 minutes or 10 minutes or ask them to headline, they'll be very happy to hop onto a stage. One of the other challenges I found was getting the local comedians, getting them to understand professionalism and to be reliable. I don't know why people would say they're going to come and perform at a show and not rock up. I still, there's a big question mark somewhere that I don't understand what happens there. So that's sometimes, and I know it's critical for us to make sure that we have a great lineup of comedians, a mixture of well-known and new ones, so that people, it's sort of further developing the fan base. So that's a big thing. Also, you'll get, I found that we had people reach out to us and say, come and do comedy at our bar or our pub. But it doesn't always work like that because people essentially are going to a pub or a bar or a restaurant because they want to go and chat to their friends. They don't want to listen to somebody tell jokes. So those kind of venues are always a challenge. So the other thing is obviously finding great supportive venues who can give you space and a space that you don't have to pay ridiculous amounts of money for.
Yeah.
So those were just some of the challenges.
No,
There were challenges. great sort of achievements and great things that have happened in comedy. And I think that's one of the reasons I'm still doing it.
Well, and you are still doing it. You have a show at the Mandela Bay Arts Festival. I'm wondering if you would like to share a little bit more about, yeah, what your perspective is, what people can expect from that show, and when it is, and how we can all get tickets
Sure.
to it.
It's called ADHD, The Bottle in Me. And just to go back to the actual Mandela Bay Arts Festival. So Mandela Bay Arts Festival has been implemented by the National Arts Festival team. They're partnering with the municipality. It's not a National Arts Festival initiative. The National Arts Festival team are the implementing agent. So they've partnered up with the municipality, our local municipality, to put on this Mandela Bay Arts Festival. And what I absolutely love about the Mandela Bay Arts Festival is it's showcasing local guys. So anybody who's a local artist or performer, we signed up, we registered, and an application was sent through. And then the local artists made a decision as to who would be chosen to perform at the Mandela Bay Arts Festival. So it's artists that have been chosen by other artists, local artists. I love the fact that, first of all, I'm getting to meet this whole community of performers and artists and musicians and singers and poet, storytellers, and they're all going to be in one space. And people can come and they can see however many shows they want to, and it's all local guys, and they're all so fabulous, and some of them have got the most beautiful looking performances. I actually can't wait. It really is just going to be fabulous. So it's sort of like a mini arts festival. So that's what Mandela Bay Arts Festival is all about. So I was very fortunate to have my show chosen, and I have 3 shows on the Mandela Bay Arts Festival. It's called ADHD, The Bottle and Me, and it's my personal journey with alcoholism. I 15 years ago. In actual fact, this year it's going to be 16 years. I haven't had any alcohol to drink. And, whatever. I'm sober. I'm a recovering alcoholic. I am an alcoholic. I'm all of those things. But it was the recent realization that in actual fact, I have ADHD as well. That really sort of pushed me into actually writing about this. Because it's been such a long time, I've never been very outspoken about it. I don't go to AA meetings. I don't do all of those kind of things. But I think it was that click, that to say ADHD is almost not the only reason that you are an alcoholic, but there's a real link between the two. And as I said earlier, I am quite a serious person sometimes. I haven't just looked at TikTok, followed those kind of social channels. I've actually done a little bit of research to actually, not research, we can't call it research, it's called Googling, to actually find out why I think my ADHD played a role in being an alcoholic. Anyway, so that's really the story. It's ADHD, The Bottle and Me. So it's a comedic sort of journey on my ADHD. My show is literally 25 minutes. I've got 25 minutes of stand-up on the ADHD. It's quite interactive as well. And I'm always supported. Nolwazi always comes onto the stage with me. She does 5 minutes. And I've got another 2 singers, a musician, friends of mine, who will be singing. So we have this whole show that we put together that's not just about me and not just about me performing. I'll save that just about me performing for the National Arts Festival.
What I was going to follow up with is you mentioned your journey with sobriety, and we have addiction, we have mental health. I think both of those things, especially, I don't know, are things that carry some stigma. And obviously it's not hard to understand why someone, even as they're going through a journey in recovery, would be a little bit, quieter about it. Right. But then you're bringing it on the stage, right? Yeah. And so I'm interested in kind of what that experience has been like. It's a double whammy, right? It'd be one thing if you were just talking about the addiction. It'd be one thing if you were just talking about probably a long time undiagnosed with ADHD. I'm not sure what your personal story is.
Yeah, it was. It was actually quite daunting at first, but now that I'm doing it, now I can readily, easily talk about it. And yes, now that when you put it in those words, I think the whole stigma was probably something that made me reluctant to actually speak to people about it. But a couple of my closer friends had said to me, you've got something value to share with people. And I don't want to go and teach people how to be sober or stuff like that. But if I can stand up and tell people my story in a humorous way that sort of is engaging and gets people thinking, because that's the big thing for me is the feedback I've got from people after my shows. I can tell by just those comments of people that have come to me afterwards saying, oh, it's so relatable. Thanks for making me not feel so alone. I came to your show because my friends are hut full of me drinking. There were all of these kind of sort of things. And you realize then, there's some sort of an impact that's been made. And, if one person can take away one thing that I've said and say, you know what, I'm going to try and implement that in my life. That's great. That's great. I've spoken to you about this before. And that's what I like about comedy, not just for me, but many comedians use comedy as social commentary or almost to be a social agent for change, even. Because we really get away with saying a whole lot on stage that you might not normally say to people. Look, I'm not really there at the point where I can happily go and be totally inflammatory on stage, but I'd like to get to that point. I really would like to get to that point where I could say really important things that would upset people and be able to handle the backlash. I'm not sure that I'm strong enough to handle the backlash yet.
But it also strikes me, I mean, and this is one of the things that I'm really curious about is like, particularly with the alcoholism part. I mean, I know a lot of comedians will admit to having, different struggles with mental health, and that's, I think, well documented everywhere. But it's also an art form that's really closely related with alcohol. And in South Africa also, drinking and alcohol as part of socializing also has like a particular history to it for all kinds of different groups of people. And so it's interesting. I mean, I imagine you've done a lot of this material on getting sober and stuff in bars, right? And so I also wanted to ask a little bit about that specifically, maybe moving more towards that social commentary dimension. I don't know.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I have often thought, should I be doing comedy in a venue about and talking about alcoholism if I'm in a venue that sells alcohol? But I also think to myself, well, this is my choice. Everybody else must make their own choices about whether they want to drink or not drink. So I can't, because by doing that, I'm excluding a whole lot of people. But yeah, I think what really hits a note for me is the fact that alcohol is very, very acceptable, as you know, in South Africa. I'm sure it's like this pretty much all over the world, but I found in South African society, there's so many things. I talk about this in my set on ADHD, The Bottle of Me, is that it's very acceptable. We drink for all sorts of reasons. And when you say you don't drink, people are like, it's like almost, come on, just have one. And they almost, sometimes they don't do it to me anymore. I think I look too fierce for that. But it used to be, I'll just have one. Until I say to them, look, if you give me a drink, there are going to be problems in this pub tonight or in this venue or whatever. So that sort of stops people. But I wouldn't have done that in the early days of not drinking. So there's a lot of a push to get people to drink with you. If I'm going to become drunk and paralytic and fall down, then I want you to be with me on this journey. There's a great song by Morgan Wallace and Post Malone. Don't pretend that I did this all on my own. I had some help. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that I had help to become an alcoholic, but and that's also part of the stigma, isn't it? That we say that you're an alcoholic, you drink too much, but ignoring the environment that we are actually brought up in and we are in, with a lot of pressure from society to actually drink. We're going to have fun. Let's go out. Let's go get pissed. Let's have a party. And it has to be done with alcohol. So that commentary is actually quite important, I feel, especially for our teenagers as they're growing up,
Yeah, no, I remember reading a statistic where it talked about South Africans apparently, they drink, the percentage of South Africans who drink is actually very similar to like I guess the African average, but the amount that South Africans drink who do drink
Really?
is
Yeah,
apparently significantly higher than like the
really.
world average. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, there's a lot going on there. And I hear you about sort of like, that kind of being the default form of socializing. And I
right.
also sometimes think that it's one of the things that not necessarily hold stand-up comedy back, because obviously stand-up comedy has a wonderfully mutualistic relationship with things like pubs and bars and stuff. But it is interesting that it's an art form that until you're 18, until you can legally enter a lot of these venues, you're not actually able to experience it live unless it's in, a very formal sort of theater setting, which it sometimes
Sure.
is. And it's been something that I've considered about thinking about getting comedy in front of different kinds of audiences. The fact that you have young people who can't necessarily legally go into bars, who are experiencing comedy primarily as like something you watch on your phone. And
Mm.
I don't know. I think there's a relationship there between the complaints that we have about people not having that culture of going to comedy. It's not something that people ease into, I guess, is what I'm saying.
No, but you say that. So just to your different audiences, it's interesting because I swear in my comedy, and I always advertise my shows as at least 16 plus, probably 18. It's for an adult audience. I don't use nice swear words. I use terrible swear words sometimes that I've had friends my age say to me, that's not for you. And I'm like, I love expressing myself in swearing, and that is the way I do it. But in saying that, my ADHD show, I'd love to be able to take it into businesses, into corporates, as almost as a wellness initiative, just to say to them, you can learn from me. Maybe you have staff that are behaving the way I used to behave in the workplace or in my personal life, and it'll give you a little bit of an understanding, and maybe it'll help you to actually deal with them and to help them. Understanding that my message could be valuable to the corporates makes me also understand that I really need to probably eliminate the swearing, because that wouldn't be a big sell. In actual fact, I had one of our local drama teachers say to me, she's very well known in Port Elizabeth from a dramatic point of view, director, everything. She came to me after my show and she said to me, this was fantastic. She said, but it's like a TED talk, actually, like a funny TED talk. And she said, you just need to take out the swearing. So I like that accessibility to different audiences. And I find another thing, Robin, which is quite interesting for me, because predominantly when we are on stage here locally, is I'm doing comedy. There are a lot of Black people in the audience and colored people. And even within that, there's sort of different levels of education, maybe different class. It's interesting, so interesting for me. And I find my Black audiences the most intimidating as a white woman. But I always have such amazing people feedback from them. I love dealing with Black people. It's intimidating being on stage in front of them, but having conversations with them, they are so beautifully open and expressive sometimes. And I've had people say to me after a show, to see a white woman on stage talking about her experiences it's interesting for us as well. We get to hear and see what Black people or colored people, because almost race comes into it all the time in comedy. It's often bandied around. And it was quite validating for me to have what you have to say is important, and we are interested in hearing about it. So it was nice. It was lovely, actually.
Yeah, I find that definitely rings true in the interactions that I've had. I think that coming as an American to South Africa, there is a real curiosity that I think you don't always, and maybe it's just because I'm able to look at South African society as an outsider, but I often find that people knowing kind of the different spaces that I find myself have this real, like, there's just kind of this genuine I've never been in that space, and I'm curious about what that person is like, or what those people are saying about such and such a thing. It doesn't necessarily extend to like integrating that space yourself and entering that space yourself,
No.
but there is like a, I don't know, it always felt very charming to me. There was like a sort of genuineness to that curiosity that I think we people must not lose, because that's, I think, kind of the building blocks of, I don't know, reconciliation, whatever you want to call it, social
Right.
cohesion.
Social cohesion, exactly.
So one of the things that we're going to try and do on Cast Chats is each guest brings in an item or an image, something that is meaningful to them, that connects them to the South African past. Because one of the purposes of this podcast is to take people from different walks of life, especially artists, comedians, creative people, and bring them together with scholars so that we can explore our common connection to the South African or the Southern African story. So you have chosen two images that you want to share. The first one is up here on the screen, and I just want to invite you to talk about the image and what it means to you.
You've been to Gqeberha, and I don't know how much of the history of the city you know, but it was a colonial outpost, and famously, Sir Rufus Donkin was the founder of Gqeberha. But we had, this is prior to the Group Areas Act, and I'm sure you will know, Robin, but for other people that don't know, I think it was in 1952, the Group Areas Act came into being in South Africa, which said that Black people had to live in a certain area, white people could live in a certain area, Indian people had to live in a certain area, Chinese people had to live in a certain area. So everybody was segregated. But prior to that, this area called South End in Gqeberha, or what was then called Port Elizabeth, was a vibrant, bustling, multiracial community. And there's a little museum on the beachfront. It was right sort of at the harbour, above the harbour. It's prime property. It was such a lovely community. There's a little museum called the South End Museum, which talks about the history of South End as it was before the 1950s, and how everybody lived together quite happily. And I went on this little walking tour of the area. There's a graveyard, there's a church, I think it's St. Mary's, that's up on the hill. It's basically the harbour down below. There's a graveyard below the church. So it was just so interesting to go on this little walk. And this guy came with, he's an old Muslim man who lived in Southend prior to the 1950s. And for me, what was so beautiful, there were so many beautiful things. It was also so very, very sad. I think the saddest thing for me was to understand that here I was speaking and engaging with a man who had lived through these horrors, who had lived through this, you've got to get out of your house and you've got to go and live somewhere else. This era of separation and what's it called? Unhoming people. It's not the right word. I don't even know what the word is to call it, but kicking people out of their houses and putting them in a strange environment. I just find it very strange and very odd that anybody could have thought that it was okay to do this stuff. I loved speaking to this guy. You know, he took us along. He showed us the Muslim graveyard as well, which is also sort of just next to the St. Mary's graveyard, a little bit smaller. But the fact that I was speaking to a man who this had happened to in living memory, and I think that all of these things, the Group Areas Act and the thing that people were kicked out of their houses and had to move elsewhere with very little, lost belongings and all sorts of things, is actually still in the living memory of so many South Africans. And once that generation of people has passed on, you know, we'll have to hear about that and learn about that from the history books.
Yeah.
So when you come back to Gqeberha again, if you haven't been to the South End Museum, you really should go. It's a lovely little museum with some very interesting people there and interesting stories to tell.
All right. So you actually brought two images in, And I am now interested in what you have to say about this second, which is a picture of you.
Yeah. So these were my Extinction Rebellion days. And I don't know if you know anything about Extinction Rebellion, but they're fighting against climate change. Their slogan is rage and love. And I love the combination of those two words together. The other thing that they're really believing is non-violent protesting, but radical protesting. So they do, I think, Extinction Rebellion a couple of years ago, they were the group that they glued themselves to the corridor that goes between the White House and the council chambers or whatever. They glued their hands to the walls, whatever, super glue. So they made a human barrier. They're the ones that are always doing fake oil spills in front of banks. It's like really radical protesting, but it's always non-violent protesting.
Mm.
So this was World Food Day you can see it, obviously it must have been it must have been 2020 or maybe 2021, but we were still wearing masks.
Mm-hmm.
And World Food Day was specifically talking about the fact that children are dying from starvation, which honestly doesn't even make any sense to me, because I mean, how does that even happen? How are people not being allowed to feed? You see, Robin, I can get really serious. These things really bother me, because it still shows that there's so much inequality. I can only really speak about it from a South African context, but poor are getting poorer, and people are battling to put food on their table and feed their kids and things like that. And it just, I don't understand. I feel like there should be some sort of a solution to it. So this is just I've done a lot of protesting. I haven't done protesting in recent years. Probably haven't been to a protest for about 3 years. I'm still very much a climate activist, but I'm not so much an activist, I suppose. I'm more of, as I said at the beginning, a hippie. Love to live off the grid. I like to be natural. I like to swim in the ocean, things like that. But for me, people are important. Primarily now, though, I'm very much hanging my hat on the feminist gender-based violence peg.
Yeah.
And there are things that I want to do around that, because I think that almost feeds into this whole thing that children are starving, because all of these problems are not even climate change. There's not one solution. These problems are complex, and they have such massive repercussions on so many different aspects of society. So it's difficult to sort of choose one thing. And I'm not saying I have chosen one thing, but at the moment, I really want to try and fight the fight against gender-based violence in some way. As women, it's our time to start making a stand or whatever, or to be acknowledged or recognized or validated. I don't know, a whole lot of different things. Even my thinking around this is very complex and chaotic.
As you've said, the world is complex and chaotic.
Yeah.
So I've appreciated this conversation. I think I've learned a lot, and I think it underscores what I've always believed very, very fervently, which is that, when you talk about somebody being a stand-up comedian or working in stand-up comedy, particularly in a place like South Africa, that doesn't just mean generally telling jokes on stage, right? Comedians and their motivations for doing what they're doing are entangled with so many other different ideas and impressions and causes. And the point that you're making about sort of the comedian as a social commentator, I think, is something that we're understanding better, I think, as time goes on, particularly as academics. But it's a point that, again, bears underscoring. And even in a place that is a little bit off of the beaten path in terms of comedy or the arts in general, like Nelson Mandela Bay, really, really exciting to hear about everything that's going on there in terms of activity and people organizing things. The last question that I want to ask has to do, I guess, more explicitly with the purpose of the podcast, which is about cultivating collaborations and dialogue between creative people and people in academic fields. You experienced this firsthand because of that humor conference that we talked about at the very beginning. But I'm wondering what that sort of means for you and what you maybe, what desires or things that you wish people who come from a background like mine and like the scholarly community understood about what you do, or just even a society like South Africa or Gqeberha.
Yo, Robin, that's a very deep question, and I actually don't really know how to answer it. I can tell you that when we went to that conference, it was very intimidating for me, not coming from an academic background, and it was difficult to understand what everybody was saying. I got a lot out of that conference. And really, it was fascinating. It was nice to meet all the people. It was interesting. So much of the stuff just went straight over my head. I was like, oh, right, I don't know what's going on here. But some of the stuff was really, really interesting. I think I really loved maybe the most the psychological aspects of the psychological presentations. But the other thing that I really loved was that whole story with, I think, the town hall in Nigeria. Wasn't that an interesting thing? That made me, I don't know if you remember it, but it made me really switch my thinking on roasts and people being quite outspoken on stage in actual fact. But yeah, I don't know. I think that we actually we need to strive to understand each other, and we can't really understand each other if we don't have conversations, and we can't have conversations if we are not interpreting each other properly. So I suppose one of the things would be have the dialogues, get involved with people that are different to you, and while your own communities, your own academics or your own artists provide fuel and sustenance and maybe even inspiration, moving out of those communities and engaging with people that you don't normally engage with and engaging with people at different levels. You know, you're moving out of comfort zones, and that almost creates this ability for you to actually change. And through change, we are going to grow. We're going to grow as society, we're going to grow, our communities will grow, and us as individuals will grow. One of the reasons Nolwazi and I started the Friendly City Comedy Crew, besides the open mic stuff and getting stage time, one of the things we wanted to do was to organize workshops and engagements with other comedians. So people that our guys locally would not necessarily normally come into contact with, to be able to have conversations with them and learn different things from them. So for me, I think that's probably the one thing I would say about the two different communities. Find ways to integrate meaningfully or dialogue or make an effort to get into each other's spaces and understand each other. That's how we're going to move forward, I think. Social cohesion, Robin.
And don't forget the hottie dogs. There needs to be outreach to the hottie dogs.
My budgies. That's my budgies.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Yeah, I mean, yes to all of that. That's why we're here. I really, really appreciate your willingness to join us in season 1 of Cast Chats, and I really fervently hope that this can also be a venue where more of those dialogues and collaborations can happen. So, break a leg with your show. When is it again? Remind us.
My show, the Mandela Bay Arts Festival, starts on the 22nd, but my show is on the 22nd, the 27th, and the 1st of March. So I've got 3 shows, and the festival ends on the 2nd of March. So it's literally, what's it, about just over a week, 10 days. So
Yeah.
10 days.
Tickets, how much and where?
Yeah, they normally about 100 Rand. Tickets for my show are 100 Rand. I think everybody's tickets are 100 Rand. And they're on Mandela Bay Arts, MBAF, mbaf.co.za. But if anybody follows me over on Instagram or Facebook and even TikTok, Chantal Harris Comedy, I'll also have links in that up there.
Yes, and I'll make sure that when this is on YouTube, I'll have all of your socials linked in the description of the video. So thank you again so much.
Thank you so much, Robin.
Have a wonderful day.
Thank you. And you too.